Welcome, everyone. We are super excited tonight to have Great River's own Dylan Weyrauch talk to us about using natural dyes and etc. So thank you, Dylan.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for having me. This was sort of an expansion of my capstone project. I have no experience prior to this project with natural dyes, so it's me joining the Master Naturalist program that encouraged me to kind of seek out ways that I can wrap my arms around the study while kind of coming from my own background, which is screen printing. You'll notice some puns and jokes in here that really just kind of go along with the rock poster, screen printing motif. So if that's not your thing, forgive me, please. It's just to kind of add humor to the dry weight of the material, as you say. So I'll begin. To just skip ahead and do a spoiler alert, yes, you can tie-dye and screen print with natural materials, with caveat. Dyeing fabric is one thing, printing on fabric is another thing, and printing on posters is another thing, which is a little easier, and we'll get to that. Usually it's the plants that produce the dye. I'll skip over to the lake pigments. You can create a pigment from that dye using alum and a mordant and some chemical processes that are relatively easy to create an insoluble pigment. And then minerals by themselves provide an insoluble pigment. So you would grind that down and add it to a medium and you would print with that. And I don't have a script, so I'm just winging it. We'll get to Q&A. If I skip something, I'll be happy to answer those questions. When I approached this topic, I sort of sat at the crossroads between many industries. I'm in printing and sort of textiles, but I soon learned that the archaeologists have been discovering natural pigment use for 100,000 years, they say. And then mixed with when the archaeologists and the botanists get together, they talk about the lake pigments and the dyes. When they get together with the geologists, they talk about the mineral pigments. And then when you get into Egypt, they start getting into real poisonous synthetic. So just because it's natural doesn't mean it's safe. Then we kind of bridge into foraging, which is something I was interested in. I wanted to gain more of an understanding of plant identification. This sort of led me through that a little bit. And mining, there is the mining industry aspect that, helped me understand a little bit more about iron as we get to that. And then textiles and printings finally, and help me bring it all together. And hopefully, this sort of blows your mind a little bit too, and kind of get you interested. Maybe you can do some kitchen experiments with your kids or something else. Who's asking? My name is Dylan Weyrauch. I've been a screen printer for 20 years. A lot of it has been your kind of rock poster, your concert stuff, your festival stuff. As I mentioned before, this is just an expansion of my capstone project I was invited to share. And I have no previous history with, with any of this, really. Natural history, geology, botany, not in the way that this has sort of led me to. Safety and ethics, I'm sure I don't need to mention this to you all, but make sure that if you do get a kick out of this and you want to go out, you want to explore this, do it ethically, legally, and where it's permitted. Remember that natural doesn't mean safe. You can't just go pick up a plant, boil it down, and throw a t-shirt in it and hope for the best. I'd like to separate what we are doing and what we're not doing. We are connecting naturalist pursuits to hobby and craft. We're exploring a multidisciplinary track for hands-on learning, but we're definitely not disrupting textile supply chains, revolutionizing the print industry, or at first guaranteeing washable apparel items, except for the dye. The dye has a long-standing with that. The printing, I'll need to experiment with some. For tonight, we'll go through some definitions and comparing what a pigment is, what a dye is, modern and historical color, or historical uses of color. We'll go through the source and processes of how to attain these colors from these different natural sources. We'll go through ideas of making the ink. And down here at the base here are some examples of success. So these are all for free. So this stuff does work. And here comes my puns. We've got classic rock poster art is really what this is about. So, and this just blows my mind that iron comes from a supernova, makes its way through space, goes through the origins of the earth, and then gets pushed up and then lands up on a poster. I think that's really cool. And then at the end here, in case I skip over something or we're not able to answer some questions, I've loaded you down with resources to where you can explore. So first we'll define and compare the pigment and dye and the history. So a pigment is basically just a tiny color, it's something that's insoluble in water. This says insoluble, but I mean water whenever it says that. It will be added to a binder or a medium, whether that's just water, whether that's gum arabic, whether that's sodium alginate in water, something to carry that color. And then you'll have some other additions to that to kind of make sure that it doesn't dry out on you. That way it's smooth. That way the particles disperse properly. And within my experiments, we can stick pretty close to the natural track. But again, this is for fun. For a dye does dissolve in water. So there's the difference, the main difference there. And it binds to the fiber differently, whether it's cellulose fiber, like cotton or hemp, or if it's wool, there's a parallel track for it to bind to the protein fiber. This requires mordants, which will be sort of a bridge between the fiber and the color. And then your pH is involved, your heat, and we'll go through all this stuff. So I'll move right along. And I'm not on the X's here. So here we start with the classic rock puns. Sort of anything that you think of that's printed nowadays has the same principle to the ink. It's got the particle, it's got the medium, it's got everything that we just briefly discussed. And same with the dyes, except Procyon dyes and diazo dyes, all these other things have their own benefits, but also challenges and caveats. And then we'll just kind of move forward here. Another thing that's very different is today, printers, we can match a color. We have suppliers that we've got a Pantone booklet, and then all the ink suppliers make colors that are kind of matched off of that Pantone booklet. The customer and the printer can just discuss, they can mention a number and say, okay, we want Coca-Cola red, or we want, whatever it is. And we know that we have to go by this guidebook and the right light. We can't do that with natural dyes. So there's the first big difference. And as I mentioned in the beginning, so this Lascaux cave, some of you may know about, is the cave in France that's close to 20,000 years old. There's the ochre pigments. Well, I've discovered through studying this that there's caves with ochre toolkits that they claim have been around for 100,000 years. And I thought that was pretty mind-blowing. So these are ochre posters, basically. So when making this, you kind of get this connection to the past of the early humans that are using the first tools. You get to now use that and make your own rock poster. And some of these other dyes and stuff. So plant dyes are light sensitive. And maybe even sensitive to water and wash and some other things. As I mentioned, they're hard to repeat and color match. Mineral pigments, they can be very durable depending on your binder. Artists, they grab this color, excuse me, I'm not on these X's. They grab this color from plants, from fungi, from minerals, oxides. They even do some insects. And then they use the reagents like soda ash and alum and iron and all these other things. Okay, that's in here. Okay, so we'll get into sort of the process now. First, I'll discuss the color sources, and then we'll get into how to bond that soluble dye on and make it an insoluble pigment. So I sort of have a color chart here. But all of these colors can be adjusted. You can't really, I wasn't able to make a true color wheel because I'm not experienced enough. Because all of these colors, although they might start off as a red with a different pH or a different temperature or different mediums, they could all change color. And we'll go through some of these. I'm sort of afraid of running over time, so I'm going to try not to dive into too much detail. But you have a handful of sort of chemical categories, and these chemicals are found throughout the plant and animal world. And you could almost pick a plant and Google, does it have an anthraquinone in it? Does it have a flavonoid in it? Does it have an indigo in it or indigoid? And that's sort of one way to get a back door to start questioning, is this plant in front of me ready to print? Another fun, so I like the idea that, again, the iron oxides, they've been my favorite because they're the most readily available. I don't have to do anything to them. I just have to break them down into a powder, mix them into a medium. Some of these other plants produce great color, but there's a little bit of a process to it to turn it into a pigment. And forgive me if I'm skipping some of the dye stuff and going straight for pigment. There's a lot of overlap. So if you have questions and I did skip it, just please ask me, but I'll try not to. Another favorite of mine that seems to be easiest to work with and ready to go are these bottom browns and blacks because they already have tannins in them and potentially some mordant properties that helps kind of bite the fabric or the alum, the substrate that we're going to turn it into a pigment with. So the word mordant has a French root and it just means bite. So it's biting either the cotton, it's biting the wool, or it's biting the alum to go into this next stage. So we have, as I sort of mentioned this, it's the plants and the fungi that go into the lake pigments and the dye baths. The rocks and minerals are already pigments. Insects, the cochineal insect has an iron oxide in it. So I don't know, that was tricky. And I'm not going to go too much into the insects. I'm not going to go too much into indigo. Just fair warning, but the resources I have will go into that. The indigo is also already a pigment, but it requires what's called a vat, and it's kind of this fermentation that you let the fabric soak in, and I didn't get well enough versed in it to really share. And same with the cochineal. I just know that they kind of crush it up. They do a lake in the same way that we'll discuss in a moment, but that's all I have for those. Clays hold that iron oxide really well. You've heard me say iron oxide a few times, and what I like about it is it can bond to a chert, which even though it's got a high level of silica in it, it's a little tough to grind down, you can still do it. Or it actually just bonds to clays. And so when you see runoff of water with red chert, that's going to be iron oxide. And then just down the stream a little bit, you'll see clay most likely. And then that might be the easiest, if you're in an appropriate area, just kind of scoop a handful, let it dry, and then move forward with these next steps. These colors, so not everything is able to be printed for different reasons. Some, like the chlorophyll, you would think, oh, well, he's talking about just grabbing color from plant material. The green grass, the chlorophyll is just going to fade. That's not going to work. You've got phthalates and anthocyanins, which sort of overlap. Some plants have both. And then more of that in the resources. Again, I don't want to get too caught on the details. And the carotenoids, you would think that maybe, well, I guess a carrot, chop it down real fine. I don't know. But there's that one's not going to work either. And then there's a few more that are not going to work. Melanin is produced in some fungi and some other microbes, and it can be harnessed, but it's difficult. It's difficult to standardize. And then these other ones, that you might think would be able to harness and do, you just can't. I just thought it'd be appropriate to include everything with color here. So we'll get into some of the process. We'll extract the color, prepare the fiber. I'm kind of going to stick to the cotton track here because we're doing tie-dye and that sort of thing. And then you're going to have pH, your heat, and your mordants are going to affect your color and your durability. So the top track here is if you have a plant or a fungus that you're able to basically put in simmering water and extract that color and then filter out the material. That process is going to lead you to the dye bath. Once you filter it out, you just have a colored water, basically. From there, you have two tracks that you can go on. The road splits there. You can let's start with the t-shirt track. You would first you would wash the shirt in neutral soap. You want to get rid of any of the waxes or oils that are on the shirt before you try to dye it because it'll just stick to that and wash right off. Your next step would be it's called the mordant. You'd mordant the fabric, and that's done with either alum or you could put a rusty nail and vinegar and make an iron mordant. Because it's that iron particle that's sort of a bridge between that cotton fabric. You'll bite onto that cotton fabric and it'll also bite onto that pigment or dye and allow you to properly dye the fabric. And then the next track, I might be getting ahead of myself here. I think I am. Well, forget it. I started. Alum. Are you all familiar with alum? You can get it in the baking aisle. It's an aluminum salt. I had no idea what it was. There are aluminum containing plants. They also that's very outside of the scope of this project to extract the alum out of an aluminum containing plant. In the past, there's aluminum containing shale. So ancient Egypt and ancient Greece, they would get their alum from shale. Anyway, you take this powder from the baking aisle today and you want to I'm skipping again, I'm sorry. First, you want to adjust your pH. You want to have your pH pretty alkaline, pretty low. Those descriptions will be in the resources. Once you've raised the pH of your dye bath and are at about 100-degree simmer, slowly add alum to the mixture until you notice signs of precipitation. You'll notice that bond of the dye and the alum sort of coming together and creating a cloud. And there'll be videos and stuff that you can watch to really see what you're looking for. But long story short, that all will fall to the bottom and you strain all the water out, and on top of your coffee filter and your jar, you'll have a colorful goo. And that is now an insoluble pigment that you've extracted from a madder root or a marigold flower or what have you. And I think that's really cool because then you can add that to a binder and you can print with it and you say, look at that. So the dye extract. So yeah, so that's the track we just did. The metal salt and the alkali. That becomes what they call a lake pigment. Lake pigments go back. They became famous sort of during the Renaissance and the Flanders tapestries and Titans paintings. There's in the resources, there's links that will and review paintings and detect what pigments are in there, what by chemical analysis. So I think that's really cool. Again, you kind of feel like you're traveling back in time, but this actually goes way further back into Greece and Egypt. And mineral oxides, we've sort of already discussed this. You basically just get that clay, you let it dry out, you ground it down to a powder, you mix it with your binder, or some minerals are soft enough, like lapis lazuli is the original ultramarine blue, which artists painted with during the Renaissance, and the Egyptians, put on their not necessarily the hieroglyphs, but on their pottery and stuff, maybe even in makeup. And these uses go back, into early prehistory. So a list of those, again, are in the resources. Professional dye and pigment suppliers do sell them. And that's what I purchased sort of as a control against my experiments. And if you find it interesting, it's very available. And again, I'm not going into the indigo or the cochineal. So we've sort of discuss this, which you would get the madder root. Let's, for example, you would dry it out, you would macerate it, you get it down to maybe not a powder, but you would want it as your surface area is what you're looking for. You'll have your water at it's not boiling. It's it's way under boiling, but it's a nice simmer. You want alkaline water. You'll add soda ash and nice. I haven't tried this, but maybe you all know this. You can burn young oak twigs down to a white ash and then filter that out, and then that can be used as a soda ash to adjust your the pH of your water. Tannins are often found or a common place for them is oak galls. So you can break down and grind down an oak gall. You can add that to your dye bath, and then that'll have the tannins in it. Or again, you can put a rusty nail in vinegar and sort of let that turn into a nice solution and add that for you to mordant. Or you can buy the stuff from the dye supplies. And the fiber type, again, silk and wool kind of have their own track as far as what the mordant is, what the pH is, what the temperature is, what colors are going to hold, and cotton and hemp and other cellulose fibers have another track, but they're pretty parallel. They're just different. So again, you would just kind of wash, scour it. You would, while still wet, you can then add it to the water that has the mordant in it, which would be iron most likely or alum. That becomes the dye bath, and then you rinse, you dry, and I'm not going to get into how to tie dye necessarily, so I apologize. That's why you all came here tonight. Lake pigments, again, we're sort of just reviewing the same material. When I was learning this, it was such a vast topic that I thought I had to like really break it down. So forgive me if I'm being a little repetitive. It's sort of a good thing. So I covered this. This is just going over. Once you have your dye bath, you add them alum, precipitate, it bonds to that. And then once you dry it, or once you pour it into a filter, and get all the water out, you can either use that goo and mix that goo with a binder. You would want a humectant or surfactant to allow that to disperse a little bit. Common surfactant is a little bit of dish soap or like polysorbent. I don't want to get it. I might misspeak there, so I don't want to get into that. It'll be in the resources. I just want to mention that you could use the goo, or you can de-water that down to a powder and mix the powder in. I was hoping to get to a madder root extraction so that I could tie dye and screen print a shirt using madder root and these steps that I've discussed, but I didn't have time. I was able to get the posters. I tried a few lakes throughout the last few months, or more so in the very beginning, and I got a little. I over dried it basically. I put them on my screen printing screens, my goo. I laid that out on a screen printing screen. I put them in a room with a dehydrator, my basement, and they over dried. So they just became rock. I couldn't break those apart. Maybe I could have saved them somehow, but I just moved on to the mineral pigments, which were much more available for my experimentation. And this just, again, describes the two routes from the dye bath to the lake pigment. And we'll get into what binders I've played with. Unfortunately, I didn't really list my humectants or surfactants, but basically, gum arabic as the binder and carrier worked really well. And if I needed it thicker and adding more pigment wasn't enough, I sprinkled some guar gum in there, and then that thickened it up a little bit. And I had it's like some industrial glassware cleaner that I used as a surfactant that worked really well. But then what you got? Yeah, so I feel like I maybe have told you guys the whole thing already. So we'll just skip on through to maybe the questions. I'm going to flip through and maybe I missed something, but there's multiple ways that you can grind it. You can use a mortar and pestle, which was probably the first step. And then after you get it as far down as you can with hand grinding it, the pigment artist suggests that you mix either water or maybe there's another a glycerin or another medium they use, but they have a glass plate with a heavy glass weight that they'll mull it. They'll grind it down even further. I didn't take that step.
And I got a alumina jar with alumina beads and put it in a rock tumbler.
And I'll show you a project I did in a moment, but I scooped up some gravel as I kind of described by the water. I didn't quite get down to the clay. I just kind of got that in between stuff. I got it down as far as I could. And I almost gave up on this whole project because I was like, what am I doing? I can't grind gravel down any further. You know, it's like I've read something wrong. I might fail my capstone. Well, I let it go for a week. I was like, forget it. I'm putting it in the background on the back burner. And I let it go and it did it. I worked fine. Now my medium wasn't, I needed to tweak some things there. So there were some air bubbles in the print. But it worked with that ball mill. And you need it really fine. And then the screens that you use, you'll want to use like a 158 mesh screen. I don't know what micron that necessarily is, but it needs to be relatively small. So again, the binder in my case was gum Arabic, and the original that was my successful medium. The other one I tried was I added a sodium alginate to simmering water, and that turned into like a jello consistency. And that the things didn't disperse as well, especially ground pigment from a mineral. You know, it looked like it looked like sand and jelly. But I'll keep working at it. I think this is fun enough like to work with, and you know, the rock poster joke's funny enough to me to push through the tough times of doing it. You'll want the thickener. Again, I found that guar gum was the most effective. Surfactant and humectant, I sort of I'm going to mix my products there when I try to describe them. So I'm just going to skip that and allow you to thumb through the resources if you're interested. And the paper versus shirt, really it's just the paper it's stiff, it's more durable. It still does absorb into the cellulose fiber as it would with a fabric shirt. But with a fabric shirt, there's a higher bar set. You know, if you're going to say, hey, I made a rock shirt, they're going to want to wash it. You know, if it's a good enough shirt, we're going to want to wear it a few times. And I haven't gotten there yet. And here's my classic rock poster art. Again, I just thought it was really interesting to follow the life story of iron. From the supernova to the poster. That was something I could think about, again, through the challenges, through the successes, through the designing. And maybe, you know, if you share this with younger folks that are learning about iron in middle school or something, it might connect their geology class to their art class. And I'm sure you all know this, that iron, when it is it comes in contact with water and oxygen, it begins to kind of flake off of itself and become a whole different thing. And it changes color. And the more oxygen, the more water, the more temperature, all these conditions actually change the color. And this is where we get into the topic of ochre, which has been used for, as they say, 100,000 years by humans. And, you know, if I bumped my head and woke up in King Arthur's court, I could still be a screen printer. And and again, I don't want to take up too much of your time because I feel like I'm repeating myself. And next, in Missouri, we have a lot of iron in Missouri. So I wanted to explore what kind of a mark has ochre left on Missouri. So we know that St. Francis Mountains, oldest rock
in Missouri.
I think it's really cool that iron came from the core of the earth, as far as I understand it, and up to the surface to where you are printing with stuff that came from, you know, the beginning of Earth. I just think that's mind blowing. I think it's really cool that there is a town named Cowlin. Cowlin is, you know, it's a clay. It's relevant to the whole ochre story as the iron oxide binds with it, or you can use it and in its natural form as a white pigment. And then these areas here, the Pratt Spring and the Pew Ridge. I sort of just scrolled through the internet here and looked at the geological reports that there was a history of iron deposits there. And then this St. Clair is probably my loosest source, and that was somebody on a Facebook Historical Society scanned in a newspaper clip that somebody in St. Clair was exporting 250 tons of yellow ochre back in the 1800s. And I thought that was interesting, you know, kind of fits into it all. And this American Bottom Cahokia region came across a research. I could only really read the abstract and a little bit into it without paying for it. But they were actually saying that the ochre found at the Cahokia site was not necessarily from the Mississippi Plains or the you know, the south of southern Missouri. But I still find it interesting that there is ochre that prevalent in that time period, you know. And here's a little bit about the color changes. It starts as hematite. That's a ore itself, and then we get to go to goethite, which I think is really cool. So the etymology here is a little split. One source will say that it's Greek for yellow. Another source might say that it's named after Wolfgang von Goethe, which I think is cool because the theory of colors and that sort of thing. And then from there you get limonite. It's a little more brown. This is more prevalent. You know, a lot of times you're going to find that limonite more than you will find a usable hematite. And magnetite's involved, and so is manganese. There's a whole other color range when it comes to iron and manganese oxides. And all of these things come together to make the ochre that has been used for however long. This is the first experiment that was successful. This is shortly before the capstone was due. So luckily it worked out and I was able to graduate there. This sodium alginate is something I saw on Reddit. You know, somebody was talking about screen printing ink. I'd never heard of sodium alginate. I thought it was cool. Just that's what sparked the idea of this natural approach. And again, it does thicken very well, but it just doesn't disperse very well. The aqua dispersion, however, that was purchased as an aqua dispersion, that has enough of a surfactant to allow it to blend well and disperse well in the medium. So I didn't give up on it at this stage yet. The next I tried, which was a dry version of a store-bought powder, just to kind of just go one step further. Okay, it works in this fancy liquid stage. Does it work in powder? If it works in powder, I can grind it up and do something with it. And again, you'll notice some air bubbles sort of just above the iron sign there that I wasn't too happy with, so I didn't push that too much further. This is from the gravel chert that I found at this that pond at a campsite that I was at. You know, another pond. We've got festival grounds. This is iron oxide chert gravel. First, I ground it down with the mortar and pestle, and then again, I kind of put it on the back burner with the ball mill, and it was great. I feel like I would have had a much better result if I would have tried a little simpler route. I was just putting everything in there, you know, oh, what does this do? What is this? And I didn't know what a humectant was. I didn't know what a surfactant was. I didn't know what ink was made out of. I've been screen printing for 20 years, and I never thought about what is ink. And this kind of helped me get to the answer a little closer there. And there's a lot of air bubbles. Yeah, like I said, I bet I could do this again and get better results. Yeah, so we're sort of wrapping it up here. Again, it's not necessarily about the end product because we're not revolutionizing any industry here. We're just trying to learn craft and wrap our arms around the naturalist pursuits and have some fun with it. So as you can see, it does work, but there's some caveats. It'll take some trial and error. If you want to try this at home, I would try the poster route first. And then if you want to experiment with the sodium alginate and get into the fabrics, or there's mordant dyes, or I mean, you can turn it a mordant ink, like if you used. All right, I'm not going to go there, but you could. There's better ways to go about the chemistry for it to actually bite into that cotton. If you were to, let's say, print with henna and mix that into a medium, you might have a double whammy where that medium is a binder and binds to the fabric, but that henna has a natural tannin in it and a natural mordant, and that'll add to the durability there. So I'll take some questions and questions. If anybody has any?
That you have up here, oh, sorry.
So
Because that seems to have two colors, what
Yep.
you made up here.
So I wanted to push myself a little bit, do a 3-color poster print, and this is store-bought ochre. I used a hematite red. I don't have any proof that it's straight hematite. I just know that it's a red ochre made with iron oxides. And then there's a yellow, which is going to have the higher goethite and the limonite. And there's a dark brown that's going to have the limonite, the goethite, and there's a third one in there, but it's brown. I hate to not be able to answer it more thoroughly, but that's it. Thank you.
This is really fascinating. I'm so thrilled that you tried it, because we just assume all this stuff about color. But people discovered it over years and years. When you did all these trials, imagine how many trials to have an original piece
Yeah.
to get the combination.
Tell us about you.
Okay.
Sure. Into this,
Into the program, into
into the art of this.
I started screen printing just after high school. I wasn't sure which direction I was going to go. So as a hobby, an expensive hobby that turned into a career, I've been screen printing for the last 20 years. I haven't given it up, and I'm constantly searching. And a big thing that I enjoy about it is that I get to work with many different types of people. I don't necessarily do your bars and your restaurants and schools and churches. I work with, for example, I work with David Gans, who does the Grateful Dead Hour on Sirius Radio, and he hosts courses at Stanford on that topic, and I print for him. I print for other musicians and artists here in Missouri. I print for Plant Medicine Conference, and I get to go to these conferences, go to these events, and talk to interesting people and feel like I'm sort of a part of it a little bit, supporting it some by screen printing and sort of doing this type of experimentation. Thanks.
If you have a question in the audience, just raise your hand. I'll mic to you. I have a question. So this is from Hannah online. She wants to know, with the rusty nail vinegar mordant, does that change the color of the dye? And also, do you use the nail vinegar method for dye or just pigments?
So I can't answer this in too much detail because I haven't personally done it and watched it happen. In theory, a mordant can be used both for the dye and for the pigment. As I mentioned, the lake pigment before, you could add that. It does adjust the color, and it can adjust the color in both the dye and the pigment. And you can add, the rusty nail is an iron mordant. So that is the mordant that you're using to bite the fabric in the case of the dye. And that will, yes, it'll adjust the color. And there's more, I do have more on that in the resources. So I can, just briefly, I'll throw through here. There's lots of resources. There's some videos. We started with some books, and then these are actually really fun color atlases. If you click these links, it'll be a full grid of color, and it's really cool. We could get into it if we have time, but I really encourage you all to look through these, and that'll answer that Morton question in one of those ones. Yeah.
I have a friend who is interested in making paints using natural pigments.
Sure.
And I have an interest in making inks using mainly botanical sources. So my question is in regard to the dye that you produced. Is it thick? Is it thin? Could there be other applications of what you produced than either this is some kind of a stamping process, I'm guessing, or a dye process of dumping materials into it? Do you see the possibility of it being used in other ways?
You have a few questions there. One is how much material you put in. I don't think you'd want it too thick and you wouldn't want it too thin. There are measurements in these resources, so I don't want to get too much into that. But you're going to want a nice hefty color in that dye bath. And once you add that alum into the water, that's going to create your lake pigment. And there might be some dye bath remaining after you filter things out. And you could use that in theory to dye something, maybe. And as far as other applications, if it's cellulose or protein fiber, there might be steps to kind of use those scraps on smaller material. Does that answer your question?
I'm not even sure about questions.
Okay.
I'm not going to comment on your answer.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll definitely direct your friend and yourself to all these resources here. Yeah.
And this will be posted on our website, right? So we'll be able to go through your resources more carefully.
Okay.
Which I really appreciate all those. All right, thank you. This was really
Thank you.
interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.